The rain had already soaked through her coat by the time the gate started to close behind her. Elena Ashford stood on the wrong side of it, 31 weeks pregnant, one hand pressed flat against the underside of her belly, the way a person holds something they are afraid of dropping. In her other hand was a manila envelope, sealed, unopened, still warm from being carried against her ribs for 6 hours. She had driven home tonight to give it to her husband. She had rehearsed the words in the car. She had practiced smiling. She never got to hand it to him. Behind her, through the iron scrollwork, the house glowed gold in the storm, every window lit, the way Julian liked it, the way his mother had taught him a house should look when it wanted to be seen from the road. 2 security men stood under the portico with their hands folded, not looking at her. They had carried her suitcase out. They had been polite about it. That was somehow the worst part. The lock in the gate engaged with a small, expensive click. 30 minutes earlier, she had walked into her own dining room and found 4 people waiting for her. Julian was at the head of the table, still in his suit, tie loosened, a glass of something amber untouched at his elbow. His mother Vivienne sat to his right in gray silk, hands folded, chin lifted, the exact posture she used at charity boards when she intended to say no. Camille raised Julian's chief of staff, his fixer, the woman who had been in his life longer than Elena had, stood behind his chair, phone face down on the table beside a slim gray folder. And a 4th man Elena didn't recognize, middle-aged, cheap shoes, the kind of lawyer you hire when you don't want anyone to know you hired a lawyer. "Sit down, Elena," Julian said. She didn't. She stood in the doorway with rain still drying in her hair and said, "What is this?" Vivienne answered instead, "It's a conversation we should have had 5 months ago." Camille slid the gray folder across the polished wood. It came to a stop directly in front of the empty chair Elena hadn't taken. Julian didn't touch it. He looked at it the way a man looks at a dog that has already bitten him once. "Open it," he said. She opened it. It was a prenatal paternity analysis, laboratory letterhead, a case number, sample collection dates in March, a results summary in the 5th line, in bold, in language designed to be understood by people who did not want to read the rest. Probability of paternity, 0%. The room did something strange then. It got very far away and very loud at the same time. Elena heard her own voice come out of her mouth from somewhere down a hallway. "This isn't real." "That's a Class 1 accredited lab," Camille said gently. Camille said everything gently. It was her most effective weapon. "The sample was collected during your 12-week appointment. Julian's was collected at the same clinic. I can walk you through the chain of custody if that would help." "I never consented to a paternity test." "You signed a consent bundle at intake," Camille said. "It's 11 pages. Most people don't read page 9. Elena looked at Julian. She had known this man for 3 years. She had watched him cry once, exactly once, in a hospital corridor in Hartford when his father died, and she had held his head against her shoulder and thought, this is who he really is, and almost no one gets to see it. She had built an entire marriage on that 1 hour. "Julian," she said, look at me and ask me. Just ask me the question out loud and I'll answer it and you'll know." He looked at her, and she watched him decide. It took maybe 2 seconds. She saw it move across his face the way weather moves across a field, the flinch, the doubt, and then the hardening, the moment a man chooses the version of the story that costs him the least. His hand was on the table. She noticed distantly that his fingers had a small tremor in them. He noticed her noticing, and he took his hand off the table. "The infidelity clause is in the prenuptial," he said. "Section 4. It's not a negotiation, Elena, it's arithmetic." "Say the sentence," she said. "If you're going to do this, say the actual sentence." Vivienne sighed like a woman being made late. "The child is not mine," Julian said, "and you are not staying in this house. Here is a question worth sitting with before we go any further. If someone you had loved for 3 years handed you a piece of paper that said something impossible about you, would you fight it in that room, in front of witnesses, with your voice shaking? Or would you walk out with whatever dignity you had left and fight it somewhere they couldn't watch you do it? People argue about this endlessly, and there is no clean answer. Elena chose the second one. Whether she was right is something you'll want to decide for yourself by the end of tonight. Because she didn't scream. She didn't throw the folder. She stood in the doorway of a dining room she had chosen the curtains for, and she said one thing. "I want the name of the technician who signed it." Camille's expression did not change, but her hand moved a small motion, half an inch, turning her phone another few degrees face down against the wood. It was nothing, it was less than nothing. Elena would remember it for the rest of her life. They gave her 20 minutes to pack, and she used 9. Rosa was waiting at the bottom of the service stairs with the suitcase already zipped. Rosa Delgado had run the Ashford household for 26 years, since Julian was 11, since before the money got as big as it eventually got. She had never once called Elena Mrs. Ashford in private, only Mija, and Elena had never asked her to stop. "They took your key card at the gatehouse," Rosa said, "so the codes won't work. I put your charger in the side pocket, and the blue sweater the one you sleep in." "Rosa, listen to me." Rosa's hands were on her forearms, gripping hard. "Don't go to a hotel with your name on it. Go to my sister's, Yolanda, in Bridgeport. I already called her, she's making up the back room." "I can't." "You can and you will, because you have a baby to think about and no time to be proud." Rosa pressed something into her coat pocket. Folded bills and a phone that wasn't Elena's, an old one, a cheap one, the kind you buy at a pharmacy. "That has my number and Yolanda's, nothing else. Don't put your real phone on." Elena stared at her. Why would that matter? And Rosa, who had worked in that house for 26 years, and had never in her life said an unkind word about the family that employed her, looked up the stairs toward the dining room and said, very quietly, "Because I have cleaned that woman's office every Tuesday for 9 years, and in March she had a visitor from a laboratory." The gate clicked shut. Elena stood on the shoulder of Fieldstone Road in the rain with a suitcase, a prepaid phone, $480, and a sealed manila envelope she had still not opened. She should have called a car. She had the money for a car. Instead, she started walking, because walking meant her body was doing something and her mind had to keep up with it. And if she stopped moving, she was going to sit down on the wet gravel and not get up. Half a mile down, at the corner where the estate road met the county highway, there was a bus shelter that had been put there decades ago for domestic staff and had never been removed. She sat under it. The rain came sideways anyway. She took out the envelope. The hospital had given it to her at 4 that afternoon, after the anatomy scan, after the ultrasound technician had gone quiet for a moment too long and then gotten a doctor. And the doctor had explained something in a low, kind voice while Elena's ears rang. Inside the envelope was a printed report, a set of images, and a referral to a pediatric cardiology specialist at Yale New Haven. Their daughter had a heart defect, operable, serious, survivable with the right surgeon in the right hospital with the right insurance. Elena's insurance was through Ashford Group. She had been removed from the household at 9:14 p.m. She did not need a lawyer to tell her what happened to a spousal policy after that. She put the envelope back inside her coat, against her ribs, and she pressed the heels of both hands into her eyes, and she made a sound she had never made before. That was the moment. Not the folder, not the dining room, not the gate. That was the moment Elena Ashford stopped being a woman who had been humiliated and became something considerably more dangerous. She just didn't know it yet. 22 minutes later, back at the house, the doorbell rang. Julian was in his study with the door open, and he heard it, and he did not move. Doorbells at the Ashford estate were largely decorative. Nobody arrived unannounced. The gatehouse called ahead. That was the entire point of a gatehouse. He heard one of the security men cross the marble. He heard the door. He heard a voice he didn't know say something short. Then he heard the sound of a professional being told something he had no procedure for. Julian came out into the hall. Vivienne was already at the top of the stairs with a glass of wine, and Camille was coming from the west corridor with her phone up, and all three of them arrived at the front door at the same time to find it standing open on a wall of rain. At the bottom of the steps, parked on the turnaround where nobody parked, was a black SUV. Not a limousine, not a status car. A blunt, armored, dark-windowed thing, engine running, wipers going. Behind it, a second one, identical, lights off. A man stood in the doorway with rain beating on the shoulders of a very plain overcoat. He was somewhere past 50, close-cropped gray hair, the build of someone who had been a certain kind of soldier a long time ago and had never entirely stopped standing like one. He was not wet, which meant someone had held an umbrella over him between the car and the door, and that detail told Julian more about him than anything else in the next 10 minutes would. "Mr. Ashford," the man said, "my name is Marcus Julian. I'd like to speak with your wife." Julian felt the floor tilt about 2 degrees. "My wife," he said. "Elena Ashford." Julian's voice had nothing in it, not warmth, not threat. It was the voice of a man reading a slate. "I've been asked to speak with her tonight, personally. I understand the hour is inconvenient." Camille moved smoothly into the gap. "I'm Mr. Ashford's chief of staff. If you'd like to leave a card, we'll—" "I'm not leaving a card." Vivienne came down 3 steps. "Young man," she began, and she was 68 years old and had used that tone on senators. Julian turned his head and looked at her, and Vivienne Ashford, for the first time in the memory of anyone in that house, stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. "Is Mrs. Ashford at home?" he said. It wasn't a question anymore. There was a silence with rain in it. And Julian Ashford, who was 38 years old and worth $400 million on a good quarter, and had never in his life been afraid of a man standing on his own front step, heard himself say, "She left. Went. 20 minutes ago, half an hour." "Left," Julian repeated. "By car with whom?" "On her own." "To where?" "I don't—" Julian stopped. He was aware of Camille beside him, very still. He was aware of the rain. He was aware, suddenly and completely, that the correct answer to a stranger asking where his pregnant wife had gone in a storm was not the answer he was about to give. "I don't know where she went." Julian looked at him for a long moment. Then he took a step back, into the rain, and lifted a hand slightly, and the second SUV's headlights came on and it pulled off the turnaround and went down the drive fast, too fast, throwing gravel, taking the turn onto Fieldstone with a squeal that carried all the way up to the house. "Wait," Julian said. "Wait, who sent you?" Marcus Julian stood in the rain at the bottom of the steps of a house he had never been inside, and he answered, "Aaron Vance." To understand what that name did to the man standing in that doorway, you need to know 2 things. The first is what everyone in Julian's world knew. Aaron Vance had built Meridian Bell out of nothing in the early 90s, taken it through 3 recessions without a single down year, and become the kind of private capital name that never appeared in magazines because it did not need to. Vance did not buy companies. He bought the asterisk debt of companies, quietly in tranches, through entities with beige names. And then one morning the board would discover that the polite gentleman who held the paper on their expansion was now the only opinion that mattered. And for 11 months, Meridian Bell had been buying Ashford Group's debt. Julian knew this. Julian had spent 11 months telling his board it was fine. He had a call scheduled with a Meridian associate on the 22nd. He had rehearsed for it. The second thing is what Julian did not know, and could not have known, and would spend a long time afterward wishing someone had told him. But we're not there yet. Aaron Vance, Julian said. His mouth was dry. Meridian sent you here to talk to Elena Asterisk. That's correct. Why? Julian opened the rear door of the SUV. Then he paused, one hand on the frame, and looked back up at the lit doorway and the three people standing in it. Mr. Ashford, he said, in about a day and a half you're going to be asked to explain tonight, not by me. I'd start writing it down while you still remember it accurately. The door shut, the SUV pulled away. And Vivienne Ashford said, in a voice her son had never heard from her, Julian, what is her mother's maiden name? Julian turned around slowly. What? Elena's mother, what was her maiden name? Rosalind, he stopped. He genuinely could not produce it. He had been married to this woman for 2 years and 1 month. He had stood in a church and promised things. She died before I met her. Elena doesn't talk about her family. No, Vivienne said, she doesn't. And on the polished table in the hall, Camille Reyes's phone lit up with a call she stepped into the west corridor to take. Let's go back 3 years, but only for a moment, because you need one thing and then we're returning to the rain. They met at a fundraiser Elena wasn't attending. She was working it, a catering shift, one of 4 jobs she was running that year while finishing a nursing degree she was 2 semesters and $11,000 short of. Julian was 35 and newly in charge of a company his father had just died holding, and he was standing on a terrace by himself because inside there were 200 people who wanted something from him. She came out with a tray and didn't recognize him. That was the entire foundation of everything that followed. She didn't recognize him, so she talked to him like a person, and she told him he looked like a man who'd rather be anywhere else, and he laughed for the first time in 9 days. He asked for her number 3 times before she gave it. He drove to Bridgeport to see her. He met her in the parking lot of the assisted living facility where she worked nights, and he sat in his car for 40 minutes waiting because her shift ran long, and when she finally came out, he had fallen asleep at the wheel with his tie undone, and she stood there looking at him through the windshield and thought, oh no. That's what makes tonight what it is. Not that a rich man threw a poor woman out of a mansion. That happens. That's a headline. It's that this man once drove 90 minutes in the wrong direction to sit in a parking lot for a woman he barely knew, and then 2 years later handed her a folder across a dining table and could not make himself ask her one question. People don't become cruel all at once. They become it the way a house settles, a little at a time, in a direction nobody's measuring, until one night a door won't close and everyone acts surprised. Vivienne had never approved. That's not a surprise either. But Vivienne's disapproval had a specific texture that Elena had never been able to explain to anyone, including herself. It wasn't snobbery exactly. Snobbery is bored. Vivienne wasn't bored. Vivienne watched her. The first time Elena came to Sunday lunch at the estate, Vivienne asked her 4 questions in a row about where she grew up, and where her mother had worked, and what year, and in what town, and then went very quiet for the rest of the meal. Elena had assumed she'd failed some kind of test. She had, in a manner of speaking. She had just failed it in the opposite direction from the one she thought. The bus shelter at the corner of Fieldstone and Route 7 has a bench, a plexiglass wall with a decade of scratched initials in it, and a light that has been out since the spring. Elena had been sitting there for 35 minutes when the headlights came around the bend, too fast for that turn. Her first thought was that Julian had come. That's the humiliating truth of it, and she'd admit it later to exactly one person. For half a second before she'd fully turned her head, some stupid, hopeful, 3 years deep part of her thought asterisk he came after me. Then she saw the shape of it, black heavy 2 men. She stood up, and she took her suitcase handle in her left hand, and she put her right hand flat over her belly, and she looked down the highway in both directions and understood exactly how alone she was. The SUV stopped at the shelter. The passenger door opened. The man who got out was young, maybe 30 in a dark coat. And he held both hands slightly away from his body where she could see them. A deliberate gesture, one he'd clearly been trained to make. "Mrs. Ashford, who are you?" "My name is Teddy Akanjo. I work for a private security firm contracted by Meridian Bell Holdings." He didn't come closer. "Ma'am, I need you to know I'm not going to approach you, and you're not obligated to come anywhere with me. I've been asked to make sure you're safe and to give you a phone number." "A number for who?" Rain hammered the plexiglass. "Ma'am, I'm going to be honest with you because they told me to be. My instructions tonight were to come to the Ashford residence, escort you to a hotel in Greenwich, and stay on the property until morning." He paused. "Those instructions were written on the assumption that you'd still be inside the house." Elena's hand tightened on the suitcase. "Written when?" Teddy Akanjo hesitated, and in that hesitation was the shape of the entire next day of her life. "3 days ago," he said. The rain kept coming down. Somewhere out on the highway, a truck went past and through a wall of water. "3 days ago," Elena repeated. "You've had instructions to collect me from that house for *3 days." "Yes, ma'am." "Then somebody knew." "Ma'am." "Somebody knew what he was going to do to me tonight." Her voice didn't rise. It went the other way, low and very clear, the voice she used with patients who were about to hear something bad. 3 days, before he did. Teddy Akanjo said nothing, which was an answer. Elena Ashford stood in a bus shelter with a dead light, 31 weeks pregnant, holding a report about her daughter's heart, and asked the only question that mattered. "Who is Aaron Vance to me?" And down the highway, a second set of headlights slowed and stopped, and Marcus Julian stepped out into the rain holding an umbrella he did not open for himself. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, "he's dying and he has 41 hours. 41 hours until what?" Elena said. Marcus Julian held the umbrella over her without stepping under it himself. Rain ran off the back of his coat in a sheet. "Until they take him off support," he said. "It's scheduled. He signed the order himself 6 weeks ago while he could still hold a pen. Sunday, 2 p.m. "I don't know that man." "No, ma'am, you don't." He said it flatly, without softening it, and something in her chest unlocked half an inch, because it was the first honest sentence anyone had said to her in 9 hours. "But he knows you. He's known where you were every year since you were 11 years old." The truck spray hit the plexiglass again. Elena stood very still. 11, she said. "Yes, ma'am. I was 11 when my mother started working 2 jobs. I was 11 when they turned the heat off in February and she told me it was a boiler problem." Her voice was doing something strange now, flattening out, going clinical. "He knew where I was, that whole time." "Yes." "Then he can die on schedule," she said, "and I'll be somewhere else on Sunday." She picked up her suitcase and started walking down the shoulder of Route 7 in the rain, and Marcus Julian, who was 61 years old and had spent 30 of those years being paid to move immovable people, did the only thing he had left. "Mrs. Ashford," he called after her, "the lab report is fake, and I can prove it, and I'm the only person in the state who can prove it before Monday." She stopped. She stood there with her back to him for a long moment, water running off the hem of her coat. Then she turned around. "Talk," she said. The hotel room in Greenwich had a sitting area bigger than Yolanda's back bedroom, and Elena sat in the middle of it in dry clothes she hadn't chosen, holding a cup of tea she hadn't drunk, while a woman from a document firm laid 4 pages on the coffee table. "The letterhead is genuine," the woman said. "That's what makes it good. It's a real lab, real logo, real case number format, but the accession sequence is wrong. This lab issues numbers by intake date. That number belongs to the 2nd week of April." She tapped the page. "Your sample was drawn in March. The number is 3 weeks in the future." "Which means?" which means somebody had a real report from a different case and rebuilt this one on top of it and never thought a human being would check the sequencing against the calendar. Nobody does. Nobody has ever once in my career done it before I did. She sat back. Also, the technician's signature block. The name is Alan R. Pree. There's no Alan Pree at that facility. There's an A. Priest, and she's a phlebotomist, and she doesn't sign analyses. Elena looked at the sheet of paper that had ended her marriage. So it's not even a good forgery. It's an excellent forgery, the woman said. It just wasn't built to survive scrutiny. It was built to survive one reading in one room by one man who wanted a reason. That sentence sat in the room for a while. Julian spoke from the window. The real question is who commissioned it, and we know that. How? Because they billed it to a household account. He set his phone on the table, face up, and Elena looked at a photograph of a line item on a statement. A payment to a diagnostics consultancy in Stamford, dated the 11th of March, $11,400, coded under estate maintenance. The account name was VRASHFORD. Not Camille, not Julian. Vivienne. Now, before the rest of it comes out, here's the thing worth arguing about in the comments, and it isn't the forgery. Marcus Julian had that billing photograph in his coat pocket at 9 o'clock that evening. He had it while Elena was walking through the front door of that house. He had it while she stood in that dining room asking her husband to please, just once, ask her a question. He could have been standing on that doorstep at 8:55. He wasn't. He arrived at 9:36, because his instructions were to arrive at 9:36. So, was it monstrous to let a woman be thrown out of her home in the rain in order to see, on the record, exactly which people in that house would do it to her? Or was it the only way she was ever going to be free of them? Aaron Vance had an answer to that. You'll hear it in about 900 words. See whether you agree with him. Most people don't. Some people do, and they tend to be the ones who have lost something to a family that closed ranks. He was on the 14th floor of a private facility outside Rye, in a room that had been decorated to look like it wasn't a hospital room and failed. He was smaller than she expected. That was the first thing. Every photograph she'd found on the drive over had shown a broad, heavy-shouldered man with a jaw like a shovel. What was in the bed was a frame with a man draped over it, tubes at the collarbone, a monitor doing its patient arithmetic in the corner. But his eyes were completely, offensively clear. "You're taller than your mother," Aaron Vance said. His voice came out in pieces. "She was 5'1". She used to stand on the bottom rail of a fence to argue with me." Elena stayed by the door. "Say her name." "Rosalind Marsh." "Again." "Rosalind Elizabeth Marsh." His mouth moved into something that had been a smile once. "She worked the overnight desk at a residential facility in Norwalk in 1994, and she told me my company was going to eat itself, and she was right by about 9 years. She died in a room with 4 other women in it," Elena said. "In February, on a ward. I sold her car to cover the difference on the funeral, and it was $1,100 short, and the man at the home let it go because he felt sorry for me. She hadn't raised her voice. She wasn't going to. You had a house in Rye." "Yes." "Then what possible sentence do you have?" Aaron Vance closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them he didn't reach for a defense, which surprised her more than anything else that night. "None," he said. "I have a reason. It isn't the same object." "Then give me the reason and I'll leave." "I was married," he said. "Not to her. I had a wife with a name that was on the door of the firm's second largest client, and I had a partner named Warren Ashford who knew about your mother in 1995, and who spent 4 years reminding me pleasantly at dinners in front of people that he knew." He breathed. The machine helped him. "In 1999 he asked me to sign over the paper on a development in Norwalk. 22 million. He didn't threaten me. He never once said the word. He just mentioned that he'd seen a woman with a little girl at a diner off Route 1, And wasn't it a small world? Elena did not move. I signed it, Vance said. That development became the seed capital of Ashford Group. Every dollar that family has ever had, they have because I was a coward with a child I wouldn't claim. He looked at her. Your husband's house was built out of your mother's silence, Elena. He doesn't know that. His mother does. Here is what Vivienne Ashford knew and when. She knew in 1999 because Warren told her. Because men like Warren cannot enjoy a thing they have not shown to somebody. She did not know Elena's face. She knew a first name and a town. And then in the spring 3 years ago, her son brought a girl to Sunday lunch. And the girl said she'd grown up in Norwalk, and that her mother had worked overnights in residential care, and that her mother's name had been Rosalind. And Vivienne Ashford sat at her own table with a fork in her hand and felt the floor of her entire life move. She had 11 months of warning after that. Meridian Bell started buying Ashford paper the previous September, quietly, in beige tranches. Vivienne understood immediately what nobody else in that company understood. This was not an acquisition. It was a man settling an account before he died. And when Aaron Vance died, whatever he had would go somewhere. To a daughter, probably. A daughter who was, at that moment, sleeping upstairs in Vivienne's house, married to Vivienne's son, carrying Vivienne's grandchild. If Elena was still an Ashford wife when the will landed, then the debt, the company, the house, and the story all collapsed into one person's hands. If Elena was an adulterous ex-wife, ejected under a prenuptial infidelity clause with a lab report in the file, then whatever she inherited, she'd inherit as an outsider, contested, discredited, on the wrong side of a paper trail. $11,400, coded as estate maintenance. It wasn't cruelty. That's the part people get wrong about Vivienne. Cruelty would have been simpler and easier to hate. It was arithmetic performed by a woman who had spent 40 years protecting a fortune she knew was stolen, and who had decided a long time ago that the only unforgivable sin was letting it be taken back. So what do you want? Elena said. The company, Vance said. I want the paper called on Monday morning. I want the board to convene and find that the controlling creditor is a 29-year-old woman they've never met, and I want Vivienne Ashford in that room when it's read. He was breathing harder now. And I want you to take my name, publicly, before Sunday, so there's no question about it later, and no lawyer in Hartford can spend 4 years pretending you're nobody. That's what you want. Yes. For me. Aaron Vance was quiet. No, he said. And that, more than the money, more than the confession, was the moment Elena believed he was actually dying. Nobody else in her life had ever answered that question honestly. I have 40 hours, he said, and I've spent my life building something that is going to outlive me by 2 centuries, and there is not one human being who carries any part of me forward. That's not love, Elena. Don't mistake it for love. It's vanity in its last available form. He turned his head. I let them throw you out tonight because I needed it on the record that they would. That's the truest thing I can tell you about myself. I used the worst hour of your life as evidence, and I'd do it again because it worked. Elena stood there for a long moment. Then she said, My daughter has a ventricular septal defect and a coarctation of the aorta. She'll need surgery at 8 weeks. The best team for it is at Boston Children's, and the wait list for a non-emergency consult is 11 weeks. I lost my insurance at 9:14 last night. Vance's eyes moved. That's what I want, Elena said. That's the entire list. It's done, he said. It was done at 11 o'clock this morning. Julian has the letter. A pause. You'd have gotten that whether you walked in here or not. I'm not going to pretend otherwise and buy your gratitude with it. Good, Elena said. Then we can talk about the rest of it honestly. She did not take his name. That's the part that came out later, in the reporting, and it's the part nobody predicted, least of all Vivienne Ashford, who had spent 11 months building a defense against a woman who wanted everything. Elena took the debt, all of it in trust, structured overnight by 4 lawyers in a conference room with cold coffee. She signed as Elena Marsh, which was her mother's name, and she was very clear with the notary about the spelling. Aaron Vance died on Sunday at 2:11 p.m. She was not in the room. She had told him she wouldn't be, and he had said that's correct, and those were the last words they exchanged. The board convened on Monday at 9. Julian had written it down. That was the strangest detail, the one Rosa told people about years afterward. He'd sat in his study on that first night after the SUVs left, and he'd taken a legal pad, and he'd written out the entire evening in longhand, the folder, the dining room, what he said, what Elena said, the exact sentence he'd used. The child is not mine. He'd written it because a stranger in the rain had told him to, and by then he was frightened enough to do what he was told. By Monday he'd read it about 40 times. He came into that boardroom already ruined, and everyone could see it. Unshaven. He'd lost the ability to hold his hand still. He sat down and he did not look at his mother once. Elena came in at 9:14, deliberately. Nobody in that room knew why except 2 people, and one of them made a small sound. She did not sit at the head of the table. She sat at the side near the door with a folder in front of her, 32 weeks pregnant, in a coat she'd bought at a store in Bridgeport on Saturday afternoon, because she had refused to let anyone buy her clothes. She read 4 things into the minutes. The first was the accession number analysis, and the phlebotomist's name, and the fact that no Alan Arpree had ever existed. The second was a genuine test, run Saturday at a hospital in New Haven, at her request, with her signature on the actual consent form, establishing paternity at 99.99998%. The third was an invoice for $11,400, coded as estate maintenance, billed to the account of V.R. Ashford. The fourth was a schedule of debt. Vivienne Ashford did not flinch. Whatever else she was not a woman who flinched. She sat through all 4 items with her chin up and her hands folded, and when it was finished she said, "You understand that I would have done considerably worse to protect this family." "I know," Elena said. "I've thought about that a lot. You're the only one of them who was actually paying attention." Then she did the thing nobody expected. She didn't call the debt. She restructured it 10 years below market, with the covenant that neither Vivienne Ashford nor any entity she controlled could hold a board seat, an officer position, or a proxy vote in Ashford Group again. The company survived. 1,400 people kept their jobs. The name stayed on the building. And Julian stayed. Demoted, stripped of the chair, reporting to a board that now answered to a creditor who had once been served dinner in his mother's dining room by a woman he'd married. He asked her, afterward in the parking garage, standing between 2 concrete pillars with rain coming in sideways off the street again, because it was that kind of week, "Why would you leave me anything?" And Elena Marsh, who had had 4 days to think about the answer, said, "Because I sat in a bus shelter on Friday night with your daughter's cardiology report in my coat, and I decided who I was going to be about it, and it wasn't your mother." She adjusted the strap on her shoulder. "You get to keep the job, Julian. You don't get to keep the family. Those were always 2 different things, and it took you about 9 seconds to prove you couldn't tell them apart." "Elena, you had one question to ask me," she said. "It was free. You had it in your mouth." She walked to the car. Rosa Delgado stopped working at the estate that spring. There's a version of this story where that's a happy ending, and it isn't quite. Because in March, going through the second box of documents Julian had turned over, Elena found a folder of correspondence going back 19 years, short, plain letters, twice a year, updating a man in Rye on a girl's grades, a girl's job, a girl's engagement. Signed R. Delgado. Rosa had been the eyes. All that time, the woman who had pressed money and a prepaid phone into Elena's coat pocket at the bottom of a service staircase had also been, for 19 years, the reason a dying man knew exactly where she was. Elena drove to Bridgeport and sat in Yolanda's kitchen and put the folder on the table, and Rosa looked at it and did not deny it and did not cry. "He paid for your mother's room," Rosa said. "The last 4 months, the private one at the end of the hall with the window. You thought the home did it out of kindness." Elena sat with that for a very long time. "I would have wanted to know," she finally said. "Yes," Rosa said, "and you'd have thrown it back at him and she'd have died on the ward. So I made the choice, Mija, and I'll carry it, and you can be angry at me for as long as you need to be." She reached across the table anyway. "But I put my sister's address in your pocket on Friday. He didn't tell me to do that. They're still in each other's lives. It took 2 years. Some things don't get resolved, they just get carried by 2 people instead of 1. The baby was born in June, 6 pounds 1 ounce. She came out furious. The surgery was at 9 weeks in Boston, and it took 5 hours and 40 minutes. And Elena did what nursing school had trained her to do, which is sit in a waiting room and refuse to run the odds. Her name is Rosalind. Here's the last of it. There's a corridor outside the pediatric cardiac unit with a long window looking into the recovery bay. And on the second afternoon, there was a man standing at that window who had driven up from Connecticut and had not asked anyone's permission to come. Elena saw him before he saw her. She didn't send him away. She also didn't open the door. She stood next to him at the glass for about 4 minutes, and neither of them said anything at all. And then a nurse came and Elena went in, and Julian Ashford stayed on the other side of the window with his hand flat on it. He goes up once a month now. He's never been in the room. And in the glove box of his car, unopened, still sealed, is a manila envelope. Rosa found it in the dining room on Saturday morning, where it had been dropped in the doorway, and she gave it to him without a word. He's had it for 2 years. He knows what's in it, the scan, the diagnosis, the referral. He knows all of it because he was told eventually by a lawyer in a room, the way he learns everything now. He just can't be the one who opens it. So it sits there, and every month he drives north with it in the glove box, and every month he stands at that window, and one of these days that little girl is going to be old enough to look back through the glass and ask her mother who that man is. What do you think Elena should tell her?